Welcome back to episode number 2, live stream number 2 of this Friday, August 20th. Welcome. I'm glad that you're here with me. If you're listening on audio after the fact, we do actually live stream our Bokeh Podcast episodes, every single one of them now. If you follow us at Bokeh Podcast, B-O-K-E-H Podcast on Instagram, we'll keep you up to date with the next live stream, the upcoming live streams. Make sure you follow us there. And we'd love for you to come hang out with us. Ask questions, comments. If you want to send us a funny emoji or two, that's fine too. But we're streaming to youtube.com/Bokeh Podcast and then facebook.com/Bokeh Podcast. We're pushing out there live right now, actually. So if you want to go back and watch the live streams, you can go there, the replays of the live streams, but come hang out with us there for future episodes. We'd love to have you. Before I introduce our brand new guest for today, I also want to remind you, encourage you really, to look for opportunities to give back. As I promised you I would do before every single episode, today 2 episodes, I've donated to Charity Water, which is an organization, and I just popped the receipt up there on the screen. But this is an organization that I have been giving to for a number of years. Our company's been associated with for a number of years as well. And it's just an opportunity to be able to give to somebody in need. In their case, of course, they're providing clean drinking water. But I would just want to encourage everybody to look for opportunities to even just give small amounts of money to whether it's local community organizations or national and international organizations. Look for those opportunities. We're pretty lucky, and let's look for opportunities to kind of pay that forward. All right. I'm going to kind of slow down the monologue here, and I want to introduce our guest today. This is a really exciting one for me, actually. I'm geeking out a little bit, and I have with me here a brand new guest on our show, Olie Moss. And Olie, am I saying that right? It is Olie, not Ollie, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Good job pronouncing it.
I just want to make sure I got that right. I am really stoked about our conversation today. I was kind of nerding out a little bit, even just in conversation before we started the live stream. We're going to talk today about how to maximize profit with better workflow or better systems, which I know for the average photographer probably sounds like a little bit of a nerdy, kind of geeky topic. But I'm just going to throw this out here and then we'll come back to it. Something you told me leading up to our conversation today is that you built your business to a point where you were bringing in $300K in revenue a year, which is a number that most photographers would really only dream of or hope to ultimately accomplish. And the only reason I bring that number up is because I want to give context to the significance of systems, workflows that enable that kind of revenue generation. And so we're going to talk about that here in just a little bit. But before we do that, let's start with brand position. You have a couple of different businesses. Will you share both of those brands with our listeners and a little bit about each?
Yeah. Oh yeah, 100%. So with Olie's Images, we're about speed and efficiency and getting images to our customers super fast. Our prime customer is going to be like team ropers, barrel racers, horse and rodeo kind of people, right? So we're primarily doing big events. We're doing prestigious kind of team ropings. We're doing barrel racing, breakaway, calf roping, that kind of thing. Not necessarily like a rodeo, which has multiple events. We're specifically honing in on like one event at a time.
Okay.
And then I have Equine Photo School as well, where we're teaching others who want to be equine photographers and do this horse and rodeo kind of photography as well.
Which, I mean, again, I'm fascinated by this. And we're going to talk more about your business model in a little bit and the significance of systems, why systems matter, because you actually have a really large-scale business. I would just never, I'm always fascinated, actually, about businesses that you would never consider existing or that you would never consider the need for. There's so many industries. In order for us to exist as human beings that have to also exist in order for us to enjoy what we enjoy and do the things that we do. And photography, a lot of times we think about wedding photography, portrait photography, family portrait photography. I don't think about somebody that needs to create a business to photograph barrel racing and rodeos and horse racing and anything related. And you've literally built a brand around that.
Yeah. A lot of people think of it as kind of like a hobby or like a fun thing to do, or like, did you have fun taking pictures today, or whatever. But it's a business, and we do generate significant income.
And we'll talk about how you did that here in just a little bit. But let me jump to the next question really quick. Talk to me about when it comes to customer experience. I think the customer relationship and experience really is at the center of building a successful business. Despite all the tools and tech that we have to leverage these days, what is a big idea for you behind the customer experience that you provide your clients?
a lot of it is we just don't want to keep them waiting. I know personally, like how I feel is how a lot of other people feel, is you don't want to wait in line, especially like as Americans. I watch a lot of like BBC and they're like, oh, we're fine waiting in the queue, no problem. But Americans generally are not. So we try to keep our lines short. We deliver photos super fast. We get them online fast. If they want to, they run, they rope, they whatever, and they exit the arena. By the time they go and put their horses away and go to their trailer, they can pop up their phone and they can look at their photos of their run that they just had like 20 minutes ago. They can order those photos and then pick them up in the booth 5 minutes later or sometimes less. So it's just like this super efficient system where we can get people their pictures really, really fast. We're not making them wait. We're keeping them super happy. We're delivering, great images. That's kind of a baseline, but that keeps them happy and satisfied, and then they're ready for the next images, pretty soon after that. So it's just like a great cycle that keeps feeding itself.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm curious about this. First of all, that's a mind-blowing experience that you're talking about. You're creating a customer experience. The immediacy of the delivery of that product is incredible. Again, we'll talk about how you do that in a bit, but where do you think the balance is, or is there a balance between the significance of quality that so many photographers are kind of fixated on, and not just quality, but style as well? Where's the balance between that and efficiency when it comes to that client experience?
I kind of like to live life without compromise. I think there can be a way to have both. You as the photographer, you set up your lights, like these events I'm shooting at, everything's pre-set up the day before. We set up everything so it flows and the system works really good. I sit there as a photographer and snap pictures all day, and then I hand cards to my booth and they're labeled into a nice system, and then they're able to look them up efficiently with the sheet that has everybody's name on it and a number that correlates to an image that I took of that team or that run. And they're easily, it's an easy system to just kind of replicate and follow, and I can scale that up or down depending on the size of the event.
Okay. Well, and I want to just add this little caveat for everybody listening in, whether you're live or on audio after the fact. We are talking about equine photography, but the principles that we're going to be talking about in this workflow and systems today are applicable across the board. And I can even see some of that, what you were just describing. It's fascinating to me. Yeah. We'll get to some of the details here in just a second. I want to shift gears a little bit. Talk to me a little bit about time management. I mean, when you're running, especially at the height of your business, I know you've backed off from the amount of photography that you were doing, but at the height of your business, as much as you were shooting, how did you do all of that work and not get burnt out, or do all of that work and still have a little bit of space just to kick back and relax a little bit? How did you manage your time effectively?
There was definitely times when I got burnt out, so I'm not going to say I never did. I've written a few blog posts about it too, and like how to try not to. But one of the things was like trying to just like make hay when the sun shines and then rest when it doesn't. So I don't know if that's a saying where you're at, but I hang out with a lot of farmers, I guess. Yeah. But they basically, like when the time comes to do the job, you do it and you go at it, you go hard. And then when it's done, it's done. You step back, you take some time to yourself. Personally, I was taking like winters off and spending them. Now I live here in sunny Arizona, but I was just coming here for the winter, chilling for 2 or 3 months, and then going back at it. Okay. It was a nice kind of give me a break sort of deal. In between events, I would find something I'd love to do that was free or cheap and totally different than photography, which was disc golf. I found that I really like that. Yeah. And it was just like a chill thing to do. Call up a friend wherever I'm at. There's disc golf all over the country, so you can easily just pack those around. I traveled full time for the last 7 years, and I was all over the Western U.S. So no matter where I was at, there was a friend that would be happy to come play disc golf with me.
That's cool. Oh, and actually, Thanks. Stephanie chimed in. She was saying, "Okay, I'm writing that expression down. I love it." Repeat the expression, the quote for everybody again, Olie, if you don't mind.
Yeah, it's make hay when the sun shines.
Yeah, and I've heard that too. I mean, it's not an expression you hear very often anymore, but the point is well taken, which is go ahead, put your head down, put the hard work in when it's time to, take a break, play hard, rest hard, I guess is kind of another way to say that. That's good. Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to keep going too, because I really want to dig into this workflow. I'm fascinated, even as you're describing what you did with your business, I'm fascinated by all that you were able to manage. And you've got this very nonchalant, kind of easygoing personality, which also seems like this interesting dichotomy. So we'll get into that in a second.
Yeah.
But talk to me a little bit about delegation. I know that you worked with a large team, and we'll also talk about that in just a bit. But talk to me about the significance of delegation and enabling you to be able to run the business model that you did.
You bet. Kind of like my nonchalant attitude, I had to develop a system that worked well with that attitude because I didn't want to change who I am. That's really hard. But to find and create a system that works with how I already operate is much easier. So what I would do is I would hire other people that are either my opposites or they're better at something than I am, or they're like more outgoing than I am. I like to be kind of like kept to myself, right? Like I'm not super outgoing. I might sound like it. I might appear that way on camera sometimes, but a lot of times I really just like to sit at the end of the arena and snap pictures. Like that was my thing. I'd put in my AirPods, listen to a book or a podcast or, otherwise take my mind off the actual taking of the pictures. But then I would have a system in place. I would hire a crew. That could be one other person. It could be up to 15, 16 other people. And they are all, they all have their jobs. They understand what to do. Wow. We're training them, kind of some are on the job training. They got trained that day. Some of them have been with me for years.
Okay, so I guess I don't think I've ever heard a photographer or even a business person describe what you just did the way that you did, which is I know who I am. Like I know the way that I function. I don't care to change that. So rather than just changing that altogether for the sake of the business, let me figure out the systems that will enable me to maintain the lifestyle and the persona that I want to. I'm going to create systems that enable me to do so without stressing out. I think that's really the key. It's like we don't have to, hustling, for example, is this term that's thrown around quite a bit these days. And I think along with that is this notion that we have to go 24/7, like high stress, work 80 hours a week all the time in order to hustle. Yeah. And I think there's a balance that can be had when we work intelligently. You put the systems in place that enable you to work intelligently. You worked hard, but you worked intelligently as well, and enabled you to create a really successful business model and not burn out totally. I know you said there were times where you hit that spot, but at the end of the day, the last thing that we need to walk away from, our business with is just a sense of like absolute disgust and frustration because we worked ourselves into the ground because we didn't have the right systems in place. And so again, we'll talk a little bit more in detail about those systems in a second. I want to ask another favorite question though, which is about a favorite book or maybe a number of books. You told me that you've got a few to share with our listeners. Jump into those if you don't mind.
Yeah. So, I mean, back to like the kind of like, I guess we'll stick with this. The first one is The One Thing. And I just love this. This is The Surprisingly Simple Truth Behind Extraordinary Results by Gary Keller. Okay. This is like made for real estate, like realtors, I guess, but it applies to anybody and everybody. It's kind of the basic premises, spoiler alert, is like you have one big thing that you are working on, and then you just work on that until you get done before you move to the next thing. They talk about like a domino effect, and like it's just a great book. If you can master the principles in this book, you can do anything. It applies to all kinds of businesses, all kinds of people. It's just super good, like resource as like a baseline to structure your day, your week, your month, your life.
So before you go to the next book, I'm curious to get your take on this.
Sure.
When I think about people like Elon Musk or Richard Branson who have been able to accomplish so much and are doing so much, obviously, for anybody who's not paying close attention or even just barely paying attention, they have a massive team that enables all that they do. Right. But that multitasking that's still necessary in order to oversee that number of ventures seems, to me, quite overwhelming. You juggled a team and a lot of different moving pieces. Where do you think, again, that so-called balance or the line is between focusing on the one thing, which I know I need to at times. It's easy for me to be like, oh, this is a cool thing, and I do that for a little bit, and then I go to the next thing. But there is some multitasking involved in running companies. So where is the balance between focusing on the thing, but then also being able to manage different efforts?
It's having like a time block is what they call it in the book. You're time blocking out your one thing. And so from now until this set time, I'm going to just do this one thing and I'm going to work on this one task. And if it doesn't get done, well then tomorrow's one thing is still this same one thing. So in photography, for me, my one thing was like in the morning, I have this ritual. That's my one thing. I go through that, and that's my prep to get ready for the day. Then once that day starts, there's like an interim between when I did my routine and then when I help the crew and get them all set and get them ready. Now, when I go down to where I'm going to shoot from and I sit in the arena, that's my time to do that one thing. And all I'm doing is shooting pictures, and that's my one thing. Each of my crew members has their one thing that they have to do. Like the booth manager, their one thing is to manage the booth. You know, the salespeople, their one thing is to sell pictures, be friendly to customers, you know, make a great customer experience. So everybody has like their one thing, and we do that for, you know, blocks of time, and then we kind of reset and we do some other things. Like your one thing might be emails at 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. That's your time block to do emails. That's your one thing during that time.
That makes sense. Yeah. So really it's just about, it's not that we can't do multiple things. It's that we're focusing on one thing at a time versus jumping every 5 minutes from one task to the next screen to the next tab. I've certainly been guilty of that. And it really is distracting because you're not able to bring that focus that you need to that individual thing that you're working on. That's good. I love that practical advice. Little side note for everybody listening in or watching, I'm sorry for any background noise. They decided to yet again mow on the day that I'm doing podcasting in the background. So I hope that the mic's not picking up too much of that. I think you had one or two more books to share, Olie. What are those?
Yeah. So let's share these in this order, because The Tools of Titans is like, it's this massive book by Tim Ferris. It's huge. It's thick. I've got the other one, Tribe of Mentors, on my shelf back there. But it's cut into 3 parts. Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise. And I just like to read like one of each section kind of every day or at least once a week. And it kind of just gives you a little tool or a tactic or something to like grab onto that you can just run with in your business. So sometimes I don't get to this every day because I'm working on implementing that. I take this and shove it into my one thing slot and say, all right, the one thing I'm going to do today is the thing that this guy talks about or this woman talks about doing in her business. In Olie's Images, in my business there, one of the things that I learned, I think it was in this book, was to make like videos for your FAQ page. So a lot of photographers have a frequently asked questions page, right? Sure. And it's just a bulleted list of QA, boring, right? Nobody wants to read that. What they want is to hear you say it. So that's why I built a studio like this, is so I could do this for Equine Photo School. And it was just great. But even if it was just on your phone and you're just talking to your phone, just a real quick, hey, I had a customer, like ask a question, I would either write it down for later and make a video, when I could do a better video, or I would just make a quick video, send it to that customer, and then use that on my FAQ page. So whatever system and process works for you, whether it's creating, actual videos like on a camera, or just using your phone, just a real quick, either one of those can be effective. And then when the next person asks you that question or a similar one, you can send them to that link or send them that video or whatever.
Oh, I love the practicality of that too. And it makes it that much more personal. When photographers spend a lot of time, we've talked about this kind of endlessly in the podcast at this point because it needs to be highlighted, but photographers talk a lot about themselves, what they like, what their photographic background is, these kinds of things that in many cases are kind of irrelevant to the client experience, the end client experience. And I think maybe putting a little bit more effort towards something that's super practical like this, which has the additional benefit of, they get to see your face and expression in your eyes and hear the tone of your voice as you're sharing the important information with them. I think it's a really wonderful idea, really practical idea. That's cool.
Thanks. Yeah, this book's full of those. So highly recommend getting something like this.
Okay, brilliant. So we'll link to both of those in the show notes, and then you've got one more there too.
Got one more. This leads into our next question, so I saved it for last, but this is The Rise of the Youpreneur by Chris Ducker. Love this guy's podcast and his books, and just listening to this on my headphones while I shoot is just so good. And I will stop the thing and text my crew and say, guess what? We're going to try this thing out I just learned in this book or whatever book or podcast I'm listening to. And it's great because this book is a lot about outsourcing and finding people to help you, whether they're virtual staff, which is what he specializes in, or it's in-person staff, assistants, second photographers, whatever you actually need for your business.
Well, I do want to ask you about that because working
Sure.
with a relatively large team, the process of delegation, which largely centers around communication,
Yeah.
it can be challenging. And I'm curious what you've learned for me, because it's been my biggest challenge as a company owner and a team manager, working with the team, how to most effectively communicate with that team in a way that resonates with them, that communicates what it is that I need done most effectively, while also, kind of minimizing ego and managing different personality types. There's so many different moving pieces there. But for the sake of conversation, communication as you're delegating, what would you say is the most important 2 or 3 principles that enable you to do that effectively?
Just trying to understand where they're coming from and start with where they're already at, meet them where they're at,
Okay.
and then grow together from there, instead of preaching down from a pedestal and saying, I know everything. Just say, hey, what do you know? And let's find out, what I know, and let's help you get to where I need you to be. That could be making videos for your employees. I have a huge unlisted YouTube channel that just has employee training videos, and I'll just send it to them when they need help.
Yeah.
Usually I'll send it the day before and say, hey, you're coming to work for us for the first time. Here's check out these 3 or 4 videos that I have that are going to teach you how to do the job I need you to do when you come aboard.
Yeah.
And then I have that available on my desktop computer, so it doesn't have to load, because a lot of times we're somewhere where there's no cell phone signal or Wi-Fi or anything.
Yeah.
It's crazy. But I'll just have them on my desktop so they can view them really quickly if they get stuck during a process. If it's my booth manager and they're using Lightroom to edit photos and process photos really quickly, they get stuck on a part, they can just go to that video, scrub through, find that part, and then figure it out from there, do it, and move on.
That's cool. Wow. Yeah. Having that resource available not only, of course, encourages them to take the time to learn the processes, to do so in a way that probably is a little bit easier than having to read through a bunch of text notes,
Right.
endless emails and so forth, documents, PDFs. But then there's a personal touch to it, which I kind of like. That you can, again, throw that tone of voice and a little bit of personality into the communication is wonderful. And then it's scalable too. Again, we're going to be talking about systems, and part of an effective system is that it's scalable as you grow and over time. And you're able to scale that effort of communication with your team members via having that library of videos. I think that's really powerful too. Really cool stuff.
Yeah.
This is really practical. I love it.
Thanks. And what you said about taking the ego out of it, there's no ego there because it's just a pre-made thing that isn't directed towards them. You're not putting any emotion behind it. Sometimes when you text, you're unconsciously putting, man, this guy's an idiot or whatever. You're thinking that, right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes that comes through on the other end. But this is hey, here's how you do this thing, and you're not thinking about a specific person or a situation or their negative, if they have a negative attitude, you're not conceptualizing that and then putting that into your video. You're just making a general video, and then they get to follow it, and then they have a little bit of self direction, they get to figure it out themselves instead of having to ask you.
That makes sense. Yeah. And I'm sure that all those videos, they have, it's almost like a progression too of communication, I bet, as well. So they get that one thing done.
Mm-hmm.
They're I want to learn more about this, and they can jump to the next video. But something you said earlier, you're talking about ego. Not only does the kind of neutrality of these videos help in that regard, but the mentality that you described just a few minutes ago, which is I want to figure out where you're at, and let's work on this together. Let's learn this together. That collective mentality where, and I was just reading a book recently that highlighted this concept, which is rather than having vertical relationships where you're up here and the other person's down here, the significance of establishing horizontal relationships where, you can imagine kind of putting your arm around this person and coming alongside them, working with them versus talking down to them. I like that approach to a relationship. And it's certainly a mentality and attitude that I'm also working on a daily basis in my life, really.
Yeah. Oh, aren't we all?
Yeah.
That's part of it. The other thing that we would do as just a general ritual that we tried to do almost every single day, unless, it was like 3 a.m. when we got done, which wasn't uncommon. We would go out to eat as a group, as a collective, take everybody, whether I had one person on my team or I had 15 people on my team. I just go out, buy everybody dinner every night. It was just kind of a wind down, end of the day before we go to bed, just a collective thank you. I appreciate you guys for working for me. I appreciate everything you guys have done today. I know it was a hard day. Like, let's go out, let's have a good meal, dessert, everything. It's on me.
That's cool. It's about the relationships in the end.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, I want to kind of transition. We're going to actually kind of continue this conversation a little bit about team, because it's a big part of what you built as a photographer. But
100%.
you did build, in fact, let's give a little bit of context to the listeners before we talk about the systems that you built to enable this. You mentioned 15 or 16 people on your team. Was that the largest that your team grew to? Did you have larger numbers at times? And how did you build to that size?
Yeah, that was probably my biggest, was about 16, I think, was roughly the largest, including, not including like the virtual team in India. I don't know how big their team is, but it's just like another company I work with.
Sure.
But my in-person team that I had on site would be up to 15, 16 people at any given time.
Wow. And
yeah,
give us like the short version of how you built from kind of just starting out, maybe as an individual, to building a team that large. What did that progress look like?
You bet. So my very first event that I shot was actually at my parents' house. They put on events. They hosted team ropings and barrel races. I shot a barrel race at their house like 2 weeks after I got my first camera. Just dove right into the business thing. It came with a printer, so I was able to print on site that first day. So I had somebody that was working for my parents. I hired them to work for me for that weekend, and I just realized right then, like, this is scalable. Like, this is already, I could quit my job at this point on day one.
Wow. Let
alone like, the next 3 or 4. From there, I went from like having one employee. 2 months later, I got this gig that was the Wrangler Finals. It was a big one, and I knew it was going to be big. They had like 6,000, 7,000 teams that go through. It's over the course of 7 days. It was 5 at the time.
Yeah.
And I hired a bunch of people that I already knew. Most of them were working for my mom at the time, and they actually all showed up ahead of me. So I was actually in college, and it was finals week, but I had to take that gig because I knew it was a big one, and I knew like we just had to figure this out. So I made a system in place. I made videos. I helped them wirelessly. I was on the phone with them constantly when I wasn't taking finals. And I grew them as like a virtual staff. I trained my mom how to shoot pictures for me.
Wow.
And everything was kind of going. They did that for like 3 days before I got there. And then we went for another 2 or 3 days after that. It was just, it was great. I walked them through it all virtually, and we did about 30,000 that week.
My goodness. Okay, so let's just talk about, and I'm sure the story continues from there, but I want to go ahead and get into what it looks like to build these systems. And I alluded to this earlier, but I think there's a tendency for a lot of photographers who would claim to be artist types, maybe a bit more emotional than logical, that this idea of workflows and systems is kind of the thing of nerds, and sure, they may spend a little bit of time on it, but the priority isn't really given to systems that I think in many cases is needed if not only we want to create a super profitable business, but also have a life in the process too. So I'm curious, is this a mentality, this approach, this seeming natural inclination to systems, was it natural, or was it something that you learned over time?
I think it was mostly learned. I've always wanted to be an artist. I've always, since I was a little kid, kind of wanted to be a photographer. I always thought that was cool. And just, making beautiful pictures is something that I still like to do. I just kind of put that on the side. I always thought I need a job where I can afford to have a camera. I thought I was going to have to work for some big corporation and then make enough money to afford a camera and then do my art on the side. And I kind of just made this my day job, and then I still do art on the side. I created an account called The Olie Moss on Instagram where I share my like kind of art stuff, and I keep that separate from my Olie's Images business page or my Equine Photo School, because I don't want my customers to kind of get confused and start looking at me like a hobbyist photographer. I want them to see the images that they are there to see. and go to my website and that sort of thing, and look at me as a professional in that field.
Okay. Yeah. So don't distract from the brand editing.
Yeah.
That's important. I think it's just it's a foreign concept in many cases, for myself included. I mean, I've learned the significance certainly of systems over time, learning to implement them and then working with a team to implement them. I mean, it's a really big conversation, a lot of different moving parts, and it doesn't come natural for a lot of people. And in fact, a lot of photographers, I think, tend to prioritize art over systems rather than allowing both to coexist. Why do you think that is? Why is that tendency there for a lot of, if not most, photographers?
I think a lot of photographers, they're not really conceptualizing like what they are doing that is the art part, and what they're doing that could be farmed out, that could be outsourced, that will still end up in their hands to do the art part. For example, I work with a company in India. They cut out all of my photos. They do all like the basic retouching. If I do a senior session and they order, a bunch of different photos, I'll just send that whole group, that whole order out to them. They do all the basic retouching, and then I'll bring it back in and I'll do my style, or
Okay.
I will tell them, here's my style. You guys replicate it. No problem. They can do that too. My whole booth crew is basically outsourcing me and what I can do. There's a lot of photographers that try to do what I do, sit in the arena, and then they have their laptop next to them. They're trying to edit pictures in between runs, and they're here, they're there, and then it just takes forever. Or they try to do it all after the fact, without a crew, and they wait. They're making their customers wait 2-3 days, maybe 2-3 months before they even get them online. So many photographers are wasting a lot of time editing their pictures before they even show it to their customer. And I'll just show customers straight out of camera on a 50-inch screen, 3 feet from their face, so they can see. If I messed up, they know it, I'm putting confidence in my images that they're good. People, they're well lit, quality, quantity, direction of light, that's all there. It's framed up well. It's basically ready to go. We do a little bit of retouching after the fact for these team roping pictures, all the horse and rodeo kind of pictures. They still get processed. They still get edited before they're printed and or texted or whatever the case may be, delivered to the customer. But I've talked to a lot of people, a lot of students at Equine Photo School, and they'll be bogged down from 2 or 3 photo shoots they did this weekend, and then they spend all week editing these pictures, and they're just, they just don't have time to talk. They don't have time to do anything. Their life, is just wasted away in here editing one picture at a time. Yeah. And instead of sending out those pictures to be edited by a team, maybe in another company, you could use what Tim Ferris uses in his 4-Hour Workweek book, currency arbitrage, where you're paying in one and receiving in another currency. You can do that. And those people are still very talented. They're great. They're professional editors, retouchers. They just happen to live in another country, so the price comparison, we feel like we're getting an excellent deal. They feel like they're getting paid well. Everybody's happy. And, I got this one girl that I'm thinking of in mind. When I was talking to her about this, I was talking to her, trying to help her get this system in place where she takes the pictures, she does her thing at these private sessions, what I call them, and then she sends them out to get retouched in her style. She teaches them her style and the way she wants things done, and then they just deliver final images back, and then she finishes, sending them to the customer. Yeah, and she said, "Oh no, go ahead. Go ahead. So she said, there's no way that they could replicate my style. And she's only been doing photos for a short time and, just a newbie kind of getting started. And so I challenged her. I said, all right, well, I do this personally at Olie's Images. We do this. So if you could go to my website and find these images, you find 10 that I did and 10 that somebody else did. Could be somebody in my booth or somebody overseas, anywhere. Find 10 of each. I'll give you $100, she just, there's no way you could do it because they all know my style. They do everything in my style. Well, I couldn't go on there and pick them out.
Well, but you make a brilliant point, and actually a number of really great points. First of all, the idea of art and efficiency don't have to be mutually exclusive. And that's kind of what I was alluding to earlier. The conversation many times tends to lean toward the direction or the side of art for a lot of photographers. And then the notion of efficiency, workflow systems comes up, and it's kind of like, the mind shuts off at that point. Their eyes glaze over. And I get it. I understand it. A lot of it's not that exciting to talk about. But that being said, the cool thing is if we put the right systems in place, including something like delegating editing. I mean, I own an editing company, Photographers Edit. We do the very thing that you're talking about. And our clients are giving up the majority of their busy work that enables them to go shoot more, make more money as a result, have a little bit of time on their hands instead of sitting in front of the computer. But they're also able to get those images back, and if they want to your point, they can put finishing touches on it. So this idea that if you delegate or you put systems in place that your art can't also be a part of that workflow is a misnomer, because you can have the best of both worlds if you put the right systems in place. I love that you highlight 100%. That.
That brings me to I just keep thinking of these other great artists that we think of, right? Like Andy Warhol or painters of all kinds, right? A lot of those, like the painters, they would do the faces or whatever their expertise was. That was their niche, right? They were excellent at painting faces, but they would hire a bunch of other photographers that worked, or not photographers, painters that worked under them. They would paint the backgrounds. They would paint the other people in there, right? Warhol, he had all kinds of people that were, he would do like the first one-off or whatever, but then he'd have other people replicate it over and over and over and over. And it was just, having those other people around you that support you. They might not be as talented as you to do that one thing that you're known for, your art, but they're really good at supporting your art.
That's a great way to put it. And it's also a good reminder for everybody, which is that all of these artists that we see front and center, the majority of the time have a supporting crew that are enabling the work that they do. So it's not about just being this one name and doing everything yourselves. We're all going to burn ourselves out if we try to take on our work that way, in the majority of cases anyway. And one of our viewers on YouTube was saying, editing is something I need to outsource to. I've done it a few times, but I need to do it more often. And M. Klein, 1989, thanks for listening and watching. And it's a great point. Yeah, I mean, this is something, and it's funny, I own an editing company. Delegation is part of what our brand is about. It's at the center of what our brand's about. And yet I've, even in the last few months, had to learn to further kind of give up more of what it is that I'm doing. And it's been amazing, the experience to kind of give up some of what I've had to shoulder for so long now to a team, a wonderful team who, to our earlier conversation, it's not about up and down. It's this horizontal relationship that I get to work with a team in order to accomplish these things, these goals that we have set out. It feels good. We're able to accomplish so much more, and we also don't burn out in the process, which is, it's just kind of best of all worlds. So I'm glad that we highlight this. I want to get to some of the I guess, concepts, the principles driving the workflows, the systems that you developed that enabled you to build the company that you did. Before I do that, I do want to get back to one point that we kind of alluded to, touched on earlier, which is the significance of the client's experience, especially when it comes to efficiency, over client or photographers' preferences. A lot of times photographers kind of get in their own way by kind of fixating on this idea or that idea. This has to happen in order for me to put out this service or put out this product. The reality is the client is thinking a largely different way. What would ultimately make them happy, the experience that they would be absolutely stoked about, is unreliant on these ideas that photographers are fixating on. There's this disconnect that's happening. I wonder if you can just comment on that a little bit. Yeah.
100%. As photographers, we have this ego, right? Like our pictures have to be, low ISO. They have to be super sharp. They have to be all these things. And that's kind of like, that becomes a baseline. So if you put that, if you've accomplished those things, sharp images, well lit, well photographed, right? Like your art is there, that becomes your baseline. And you always have that. Like, I guarantee you that all of my images will be that way. Then you get to start focusing on things like clients. What do they want? What do they need? What do they expect? I'm doing this workshop in Montana coming up, and I have several of my old clients that are going to come and talk to these photographers that I've had, the students that come to the workshop, and they are going to talk about what they expect as a photographer, like out of these images, what they're going to use them for, why they love them, why they buy them, all this sort of a thing. I'm looking at an image on a screen and I see, composition, I see lighting, I see timing, I see all these things. these customers of mine, they say, "Oh, look at my face in this one." I mean, it's nothing. It could be a totally off image as far as the photographer is concerned, but they're like, "Oh, I love what my horse is doing here," or whatever it is. So we have a totally different way that we look at them, and you got to just kind of put yourself over here and then meet your customers where they're at and try to help them get the images that they want.
That's a great point. Yeah, because we do tend to kind of project our preferences, the things that are important to us or to our fellow photographers. We project that on the client and think that, or assume that they're thinking about those same things, and they're looking at something totally different. What makes them happy is largely different. But I've shared this before in the podcast. Maybe you've had a similar experience. One of the things that I think about as an individual who, I mean, I shot weddings for over 10 years. I have owned an editing company for 13. And I'm still, my favorite thing, in fact, I mentioned it to you earlier before we started recording, are the snapshots on my fridge of me and my kids, me and my friends and family. Exactly. And there are these like blurry, poorly color corrected, poorly framed snapshots. It just came from a phone, I think in most cases, printed on a little Instax printer. They're nothing fancy about them, but they're stunning to me. They're beautiful to me, and they make me smile and think back to important moments in my life. And I'm a photographer and I'm an editing company owner, and yet that's really the nuances that we put so much importance on. That doesn't really matter in the end. It's how it makes us feel, and the things that we tend to notice are not what a lot of photographers tend to project onto clients. I think it's just a good reminder.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Solid.
Well, let me jump really quickly then to this main kind of question at hand, which has to do with the systems that you've put in place. And I want to spend a little bit of time here as we're coming to a close. We've got about 20 minutes or so.
Cool.
The most important systems from your experience, and you've worked with a team, you've built a large company, but what do you feel are the most important systems to implement in a photography business? And again, this is not about just about equine photography. For all of our wedding and portrait photographers listening in, these principles are applicable. What are those most important principles to you?
Well, first of all, there's like 3 overarching kind of principles. First, you got to get a customer and retain, what did I call that? Customer
acquisition?
Yeah. Acquisition, yes, thanks. Sorry. Yeah. Drew a blank. Acquisition and retention, like that's huge. So you got to get them in the first place, and then you got to keep them. And then after that, you need systems in place to take those pictures. Once you get them, you land the client, you set up the date, you're there all at the same place and same time. What has to happen that day to take the pictures, capture those moments, do the thing that you were hired to do? And then you have to sell those images to them. That's how our business works. We sell them to them afterwards, except for private session stuff. We get paid in advance. But you're going to have a system in place to sell them, whether that's websites, magazines, all of this stuff to like an in-person sales booth. But we should start with customer acquisition and retention, right? Yeah. Like let's start there. You're going to need like social media, print ads. There's all kinds of ways to like acquire customers. A lot of it for me in my company was showing up and having a booth, and a lot of photographers miss out on having that instant gratification of having somebody there that's representing you and your company and having your images shown to the public as they walk by. Just foot traffic is lost. So a lot of us, if you guys have like a wedding photography, maybe you have something downtown, you have a little shop downtown and you get foot traffic in the door. We were doing the same thing, but I had more of a mobile kind of studio, a mobile booth where I would set that up. I would try to be kind of slightly in the way so people had to walk right by me or walk right around me. Yeah. Just try to have it in a good location, just like buying real estate, location. And that acquires your customers. It draws them in. They see from a long ways away these 50-inch TVs all in a line, and they say, what's going on over there? They're just like attracted to that. And then pretty soon you get them in the habit of seeking that out wherever they're at. And then you have to retain those customers. So we have, once they buy online, we get their email addresses, and in the booth we text them their pictures. We have all of that to retain them as customers. But mostly what we're doing to retain customers is just treating them well, having a great experience. They want to remember that. They want to come back. They had a good experience last time. They assume they're going to have a good experience next time. That all goes into acquiring them, getting them in front of in front of your salespeople. And then I had a secondary kind of client that I always had to deal with, which is the producer of the event. So that's like my main client, and then my salespeople had the individual customers. So there was kind of 2 tiers there. So we had to get the gig in the first place, kind of a thing.
Okay. So I want to dig into this just a little bit before we go to the photographic process.
Sure.
You mentioned briefly just social media, print ads. We won't spend a lot of time there today because I'm curious to get a little bit more into your in-person process, honestly. We talked about building out a booth or a tangible, physical, in-person experience. It actually reminded me, as a wedding photographer, we used to do slideshows there at the wedding. So we'd photograph the wedding day.
Cool.
And at the end of the day, one of the two of myself or my business partner would sit down and put together a small slideshow, maybe 25 to 50 images or so, from that very day that had been photographed just hours before or even less, and put that in a slideshow that would play to the side on a laptop, on a table with some business cards laid out, where people are walking around the reception. They're able to come over and look at those images playing, and they're blown away by this concept because they're not used to this, right? They're like, oh my word, images right away, and they're stunning. And oh, by the way, Holritz photography, and grab a business card and they can take it and go with you. But you're right that having that in-person experience, that opportunity to see the work and maybe engage with the artist, really can play a massive role in the process. Now, I know that naturally that's happening because you're shooting there on site. I wasn't sure if you were also describing having had like a storefront of some kind outside of those shooting experiences, or was it all about shooting on site?
Those would be like kind of 2 different things. I just know that other photographers that are my friends, they have an actual store that people come by. So I thought of them. If we were doing an in-person, say we're doing horse portraits or we're doing people portraits and we're showing up there on site, afterwards I set up my iMac or I bring in a TV, depending on what equipment I've got. But I've got a hard case for this with wheels. I have an iMac right here. So I just bring that with me, plug it in, upload the photos all to the computer, and then they're dumped onto there at the end of the shoot day. And I do the same thing. We kind of do in-person sales right then and there and let them pick out the ones they want. Some customers are they want to have that hands-on, so I just hand them the keyboard and tell them, push these buttons here, and this chooses it, and this one goes to the next one, and they just have a heyday. They love it. They laugh. It's so fun. All the outtakes on there, you get to be there with them, and you just build that rapport, and it's usually like if you do it at somebody's house, there's usually dinner involved too. It's like we eat together. It's this huge just team building thing with you and your client and your assistant. I always have at least one assistant with me at every one of those shoots.
And what software are you using to go through those images with them? Just Lightroom or something else?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just Lightroom.
No, that's great. It works great for something like that.
So easy, yeah.
You talked about collection of emails and phone numbers there on site. And of course that enables you to follow up with clients afterwards. Are you using particular software to collect that information?
I'm using Zenfolio.
You
it's
are
great for that. Yeah.
Really? Okay. So, and I mean, you and I talked just briefly before we started recording, or before we started live streaming, about Zenfolio. I have a little bit of history with Zenfolio, and I know that you are an ambassador for Zenfolio, worked with them for some time. They've been actively, and I was literally just talking to one of my team members just this week, actually, about how impressed I am with the active development of the company in the last few months. I've noticed they've been doing a lot. It's really cool. I wouldn't have pictured Zenfolio as a kind of a tool to collect that kind of information. I just think about them as an online gallery. Talk a little bit more about that experience with the plane in the background.
Yeah, sorry. That's
no worries.
Super loud. We're not right next to, but we're close to Luke Air Force Base, so that happens sometimes.
No worries at all.
Yeah, they haven't had the best for a long time, but it's getting better, and their new platform that they just released recently has got way better tools for that kind of a thing, for
CRM,
having an email base. Yeah, CRM. Yeah, it's super good, and they're getting better all the time. I would just dump all of those into my email list on there, and they have free marketing for holidays. So Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Christmas, all of these, it just emails your customer list, sends them an email, says, hey, we're having a sale, and then they email you ahead of time and say, hey, make sure your prices are okay and you're not going to lose money or whatever. Make sure everything is lined up because we're about to have the sale. And then I just take that same spiel, that same discount code, the same email template, and I just share that to social media too, and tell all my fans on social media, say, hey, we're having a sale at Olie's Images. It doesn't happen very often, but Zenfolio's already done all the work for me to implement the code and market it and all that. So I just boost that a little bit more and help out.
That's really cool. Having a tool like that does that work for you is such a brilliant thing. I used the company for some time. They no longer exist, but that offered a similar service when I was shooting weddings. And cool. I know IPS, you can make so much money with in-person sales, but to have at least as a supplement, a service like that Zenfolio is offering that markets your work for you, so you don't even have to touch that part of it, is kind of brilliant.
Yeah, it's cool. Like I've been done. I've been kind of retired, semi-retired, I guess, for about 8 months now. But I'll still all of a sudden just get an influx of orders. I'm like, where'd these come from? And then I go through and I see that they all have this discount code applied. I'm like, oh yeah, thanks Zenfolio for marketing for
Zenfolio.
me. Yeah. Totally forgot. Yeah.
That's brilliant. Okay, well, we'll probably come back to Zenfolio in a little bit, but
sure.
Just very briefly before we go to the photographic process, you mentioned the significance of good experience, and it would sound cliche to some who might be like, yeah, of course, you want to offer a good experience, but I can imagine you're super intentional about this too. Can you just give a couple of ideas that are behind that experience that you're talking about? Like, what are you doing in person that helps that person have a really cool experience engaging with your brand? Oh yeah,
100%. I'm always kind of looking at what other photographers do and making sure that I do something that's cooler than that, right? So one is having these big 50-inch TVs, right? Okay. And they're just like attracted to that, first of all. And then they can bring their whole family around a big screen TV like that, and they can all look at their photos. If they're standing in line behind somebody they don't even know, and that person has a picture that has a funny face on it, or they're doing something silly, they got thrown off, whatever, they can all have a good laugh. And then my team is having fun, and my customers are having fun, and the people even standing in line, they're not even bored because they're watching on this big screen TV, and they're all having a good time. I'm always a little jealous because I'm usually down in the arena and I can see the booth and they're all laughing and having the best time, and I'm down here like clicking away, and then
I totally know what you mean, though. We used to, because I mentioned we used to do this with weddings, and we only did it on small screen because it makes more sense for your booth. When we were doing these slideshows, we didn't want to interrupt the reception experience, so we just kind of put it to the side and the laptop. Right. But to see that crowd start to gather around and smile and laugh and point and that's so cute, that kind of stuff. Right. Oh, I mean, you feel so good getting to see that. It's really a neat experience.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I love it. That's the best. And we would do things too, like having a sheet of paper that's printed out that has all your different sizes laid out, like one over the next. So 5x7s, 8x10s, 8.5 by 11, 11 by 14, whatever, and say we can print these on site up to 12 by 18, and here's the sizes in comparison to another. Because we always got this question early on. Well, how big's an 8x10? Well, how big's a 5x7? Well, how much bigger is the 11x14 than the 8x? They can just look right here on this thing, and all they gotta do is point and say, I want that. I was shooting a lot in South Texas, and a lot of those guys down there only speak in Spanish, and I don't speak Spanish at all. And so all they would have to do is point to which ones they wanted, and it was great. We didn't have a language barrier anymore. We're all laughing, having fun at the screen. Cool. And then they say, I'll take that one and that one, and give me one of those in this size or whatever.
That's
great.
Really cool.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, it's just nice to hear kind of the tangible effort, and I love the mentality of, I know what most photographers are doing. I'm going to up the ante. I want to be cooler than them.
Definitely.
All right, so let's jump to the photographic process here.
Sure.
And again, this may seem obvious to people who are like, yeah, you take pictures, but I'm curious to approach this conversation from the perspective of workflow and systems, how to make this as efficient as possible for the end client experience and also to maximize profit. So break this photographic process down a little bit for us, if you don't mind.
100%. So at an event, we would show up the day before, and we'd set up the lights, we'd set up where I sit at the camera, like all of my stuff for a photographer, and have this huge kind of a booth, or not a booth, but a studio. Excuse me. A huge studio space. It's not something I talk about a lot, so words. the arena is this huge studio for me, right? So I would set up my lights already, pre-do everything, so it's ready to rock and roll. And then we'd go set up the booth, and my booth crew would usually show up the day before too, and we would spend, you know, the half of the day shooting or setting up the booth so we could get everything ready and have everything just ready to just walk into and have customers go through, and everything was perfect. And then the day of the event, the first day of the morning of, that would start with as simple as ironing my shirt. Like my daily routine started ironing my shirt, getting my lunch ready, you know, or I'd hired somebody that was, you know, helping us put together food for the crew, you know, during lunch and dinner and breakfast, even whatever. So I would even hire that done if we were at bigger events where that didn't, you know, I couldn't do all of that. And we would just start just as basic as that, like your simple morning routine. And then we'd get to the event. I'd go through, unplug the strobes. I just had like this step-by-step process. If you've ever read Atomic Habits, I have it on my book or my bookshelf back here. It's like that too, where we're like habit stacking, you know? So like you're always going to wake up and take a shower and do these things. Sometimes you can slip something else in there that's like, okay, well, now that I've done this thing, now I do this thing. And we just have that habit stack kind of mentality throughout the whole day.
So I hear two words. I grew up a preacher's kid, so alliteration kind of comes natural, I think. But I'm hearing preparation and I'm hearing process. Those two words kind of stick out at me. You're preparing, which is great. When there's preparation, you walk into a situation naturally more relaxed because you know exactly what's going on. And some would argue, well, that's just about control. And yeah, certainly it is. I mean, you're trying to set up an environment for it to maximize success and maximize process. But then that leads us to that second point, which is process. Understanding what that process is, developing a process that you can repeat every time. I mean, that's really at the root of systems, right? Scalable, repeatable processes. And it just makes your life so much easier because you can relax. You're not worried about what's next. You know what's coming next. You know you've got the systems in place that enable you to work through that. And that's just huge. Now you can just focus on getting that job done. Yeah,
exactly. What I think of, what just came to mind, I guess, is a lot of people want this exciting job. They're a photographer. Things are different all the time. It's exciting and new, and there's always something new coming up. Yeah. But I want a boring business. I want a business that I know what's going to happen every time. Then I can tweak and make a little change and see if that helps or hurts. And that's kind of like, it's boring because you know what's going to happen. You know what the outcome's going to be. And then you can tweak, and that's where a little excitement comes, and see what that does, see where that branches you and, you know, brings you in a new direction. You try new things. But overall, you want a solid, stable business is going to be pretty boring, really. And that's something that kind of is the opposite of what a lot of creative minds, like they need that creativity, that excitement, that whatever. I just kind of rechanneled that, redirected it to like side projects, doing side things and having another Facebook page that has my creativity stuff on it. So I still have that outlet, and then that sometimes will feed back in. I'll do something creative and cool over here, and I'll go, hey, that might be pretty cool for Olie's images, so let's bring that in, try it, test it out, put it in the system, see if it works.
Absolutely brilliant. I think it's best of both worlds and a wonderful balance. We just have a few minutes left here, so I want to get to kind of this third component of the workflow, which is the sale of images. And you've alluded to some of this process already, but just kind of walk us through. I mean, you photograph those images, they're downloaded to your computer. What happens next in order to make sure you can sell as many of those images to clients?
You bet. So each viewing station where I have a salesperson, a 50-inch TV, and a little Mac Mini, each one of those has all of the photos on it, and they're ready to just buzz through. We have order books, that are in duplicate, and so they're easy. They make a receipt themselves. We hand that off to the person that's in charge of the booth manager. They print the order, or they text the order, or whatever needs to be done to fulfill the order. If we print out a photo, we put the receipt in there. If we're going to text it, we give them the receipt at the time of purchase. When we print out a photo, I've learned that if you put the photo in a clear, shiny bag, for one, they're way cheaper than manila envelopes. Okay. For two, if you put it in a manila envelope, they walk around with this weird manila envelope, for the day. Mm-hmm. But if they're in a clear, shiny bag, that garners everybody's attention. Everybody's like, oh, look at that. what's that shiny? There's something shiny over there. And then they see it's a photo, they see it's from today, they see, oh, there's a photographer here. I better go find this photographer. This person doesn't even have to show anybody the picture, but everybody saw it, everybody knows. It's this like snowball effect that we get. So after we get the first couple of orders kind of flowing out there, all of a sudden, all their friends they showed it to, all the people that just happened to see it, they all start meandering over to the booth, right? And then all those people do the same thing, and then more and more, and it's just like by the end of the day, you know, you're really, really busy, and your help is like, all right, this is why we're here. And then it just slams at the end of the day, and then the next day, same thing, rises up, and then boom, drops off. It's great.
Wow. Okay. So that kind of explains the in-person experience, which in and of itself, I think can lend both inspiration and ideas to photographers, even that aren't in this particular genre.
Yeah.
I think again about wedding photography, and if I were to go back and be a wedding photographer now, even implementing some of these ideas, even if it's at a smaller scale, I think it'd be really powerful at a reception venue. There's not even maybe. I think important to communicate with a coordinator and the clients ahead of time to know that you're going to set something up like that. Centering probably the experience around bringing entertainment to the crowd with delivering these images, but then, oh, by the way, hey, if you want to take a print home today, we have this option available, kind of thing. That might be really interesting. But that aside, I'm also curious, because this will also be super relevant to pretty much any portrait or wedding photographer, the delivery after the fact. So you talked earlier about collection of email addresses, phone numbers, entering that into the Zenfolio system. I know that there's automation from Zenfolio when it comes to sale of prints or images, but did you do any proactive outreach, follow up with those clients in order to kind of build on that, build additional sales?
I didn't really do too much. I know that I could, and I probably should, and probably would have done even better, but I already had a lot on my plate, and I didn't see that it was too necessary to, like, these people mostly have already bought pictures. I just want to hit them up on holidays and occasionally try not to email people too much. I find that I know that if I get a bunch of emails from somebody, I'm like, all right, I've seen this person or this company email me too much. I'm going to unsubscribe. So I try to have a nice balance there and just do this stuff that's already automated.
That makes sense. And I have to say, I mean, as much as I, again, respect and you're demonstrating the significance of IPS and the incredible amount of money that can be made from there, I also understand after the fact wanting to kind of be hands off, and as a wedding photographer, that's exactly what we did. And the amount of sales that we were able to generate through those automated systems like Zenfolio offers were quite significant, actually. But we charged a premium up front and didn't really want to bother with the sales after the fact. And so when you have an option like that, again, highlighting Zenfolio here and the service that the system that they offer, I think it's pretty cool for photographers who do want that kind of hands-off approach after the fact. I think it's really powerful.
Yeah, just to put a little context in it, some numbers behind it, we were doing like 315,000 overall annually, and about 70,000 of that was on Zenfolio. 75, 78